Hey, how's it going? I'm Derek Kirk of Effectatron, and today I wanted to share with you 20 quick tips that I wish I knew when I started out in Cinema 4D. It would have saved me a lot of time and prevented a lot of headaches. Before we get into that real quick, I just want to mention that my Intro to Redshift, the Basics class, is now on Skillshare, and I'm going to do this thing. If you click the link below in the description, you actually will get 2 free months, and it'll actually help me out if you use that referral link. And what we do in that class is we're going to just get to know Redshift. If you've never used Redshift before, this is a great primer for anyone interested in trying out Redshift and seeing what it's about and seeing if it's right for you and your workflow. Let's get into these tips. Check them out. One tip I'm going to mention before I mention the 20 technical tips that I'm going to show you that are actually inside Cinema 4D that we're going to teach you little shortcuts and things and good things and workflow things. Well, I had 20 planned, but then as I sat down to record this, I felt like I was supposed to talk about one more thing that I think is a really good tip that is something I really struggled with as a creator and learning Cinema 4D is Imposter Syndrome. Whether you know what that is or not, it's basically when you're a creative person and you look at other people's work and you say, man, I'll never be that good. And you think, I'll never be as good as these people or them or that, or man, it just takes too long to learn. Once you have the mindset of that your value is tied to your works, the amount that you can produce is equal to your value, then you literally have the mindset that the Egyptian pharaohs had over their slaves. Slaves' value was determined by the amount of bricks that they could produce. And that is literally this box that we put ourselves in. We say our value is tied to our works, and that is just not the case. Your value as a person is not tied to what you can create in 3D. You are not only your 3D skills. You are a person. You are a friend, you're a family member, you're a brother, sister, mother, father, whatever you are. You are so many things besides just these works that you create. It's so obvious when you say it out loud, but it's so easy to fall into this mindset that you're never doing enough, that you have to keep going and keep producing in order to have value as an artist, and that determines your value as a person. And it's just so easy to get those priorities out of line. So just remember, it sounds silly and obvious, but it's something I struggled with, and I just wanted to have it out there in case that's something that you've maybe thought about or struggled with as well. And just know that it is a lie, that if you think your works determine your value. Just keep going. Just have fun with it. Don't get discouraged. It's very easy to fall into this pitfall of self-doubt and pity, and then you start to get a little bit forward, and then you take 2 steps back, and you're like, I'll never be that good. I'll never be that good. Oh, I did something wrong. Don't worry about it. Just keep going. And I don't mean keep grinding away. I mean find joy in where you're at right now. Where you're at is okay. It's okay that you're there. You're never going to get to this end game where you're like, I've made it. I've done it. It's just not going to happen. Okay, I just felt like I needed to say that. I think that's something very common amongst creatives and people, especially when you're learning and you're early on, and it's very easy to get discouraged and overwhelmed and think, gosh, I've got to do so much. I have to do so much, or else it's all just going to come crumbling down. It's not going to be worth it if I'm not the best and get all this stuff learned. Just take it step by step at a time and just enjoy each step. Enjoy the in-between steps. Enjoy every bit of it. And that's my advice to you. Just really focus and be grateful that we're in a time where we can even do this kind of stuff. I know it's awesome. Okay, now all that aside, let's get into 20 quick tips that will actually speed up your workflow, hopefully, and teach you some things that'll help ease your mind. Tip number 1, know where your autosaves go. I thought when I first started that if it just had autosave on, it would just automatically save. So if something happened and it crashed, I would just load this file back up and it would be there. That's not how autosave works. Autosave basically saves a temporary copy of your save, of your scene. So to do that, you need to go to Edit, Preferences, and then down here under Files. This is where you can set the number of autosaves, the increment of autosaves, and where you want to save them to, project directory, user directory, or custom directory. This is important. This will save you a lot of time. I've saved files all over the place, and then stuff has crashed, and I'm like, where the heck are my autosaves? Why didn't it autosave? And it did. I just didn't know where to find them. and they have tricky names sometimes, so it's hard to find them. Okay, so there you go. Quick tip number 2 is that if you want to apply any of these green modifiers to your object, all you have to do is hold Alt and then click while this is selected, and that will automatically put it inside there for you. Now, the other way is if these blue objects, they need to go inside, they need to be a child to the object rather than have this be a parent to the object. You will hold Shift. So if with the cube selected, I want to put a bend on it, I hold Shift and click, and it will automatically apply it to that object. So blue or purple, whatever color this is, objects, things that need to be a child, you hold Shift and click. Things that need to be the parent of your object, you hold Alt and click. Quick tip number 4. To make something editable, you can have your object selected. You can click this up here, or you can press C. And you'll see that that changes it from the initial state where you no longer have control over the original variables of the primary state. So now you have this custom object. Now there's a difference between doing that and doing right-click current state to object. And I'll tell you what that does. Is this is a non-destructive way of editing. So you still have your cube, okay, but you also have, you can turn that off. So you have this cube which has your settings on it. So let's say you've got your cube, okay, you're adding 10 segments, 10 segments, 10 segments. You're going to hold Shift and apply this bend material to it, fit it, and adjust it. So now we've got this bend. If I hit C on this cube, I'm like, okay, made it editable, right? No, it made it just just a square with still the bend modifier on it. That's maybe not what I want. That's non-destructive. You still have control of this, but let's say you don't want this to be applied anymore. Like you don't want to have this hierarchy scene set up. You don't want to have it to do the calculations. You just want that object to be that object, because you're going to put it in something and you don't want it to have so many layers. So instead of hitting C on that object with this in there, we now right click and say current state to object. So now we have this still, which the downside is if we have our bend and we adjust it, that's fine. But on this object, we don't have a bend. We can't adjust it. But what we do have is just an object that has got that bend deformer applied to it. So now you can throw this in a cloner or something, and it's just saving calculation time, really. But let's say you have a bunch of effects and you don't want your hierarchy to get all busy and have a million things to twirl down, and you just know that this is finalized. You can current state to object. That's a good time to do it, and it's a non-destructive, so you still have it to go back to if you need to for a reference, but it's just something that can help, especially with modeling and different things. A lot of layers underneath it. It'll just simplify it down for you, so you just have one thing over here that's exactly what you want, so you don't have to worry about all these layers and all these things like that. Tip number 5 is the shortcut U. All right, let's say we have an object in here. Let's throw a sphere in here. If I hit U, it's going to bring up all of the shortcuts that I have available. Tip number 6, let's say we have a scene. We've got a room here, and we've got a cube inside the cube, and we want to zoom in, and we're like, oh gosh, we're lost. Wait, where's my other cube? I can't tell what's going on. I've zoomed in. I can't find my way back. I've zoomed way past my object. Where the heck did I put my stuff? Hit H. H will frame everything that you have in the scene. Quick tip number 7 is a pretty easy one, but it's very handy. If you want to turn things off, this top one is the render view. So if I turn that off, it's no longer there, but it's still renderable because this is not red. Green means it's definitely renderable. Red means it's not going to render. But it can be annoying to go through and click on all these things, especially if you say you have like a bunch and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have to click through every single one of these, and you have to click twice. Hold Alt. You can just swipe up and down, and that'll do both at the same time. If you want to go the opposite direction, it's Shift Alt, and that'll go the opposite direction. Tip number 8 is if you're editing an object, is if you have like a polygon selected, you can right click, and right click will bring up all these tools that you can do to that object. Anything you can't do will be grayed out. So you have all these tools here, and these little gears will allow you to do extra things. Quick tip number 9 is a pretty cool one. Let's switch this to hidden line view. Okay, so this is all our geometry is. And we've got this custom shape. If I want to add more segments to this, there's several ways I could do it. I could right click and I could go to, say, the loop path tool and start cutting and adding segments and stuff like that. And then it's only doing it in this where I have selected and stuff, and it can take some time. It's very good for being precise. If you want to just bevel stuff, you can do that. But one thing you can do if you just need some geometry for like dynamics or something to have a little extra for calculations, a quick way you can do it is subdivide it. Now there's 2 ways to subdivide it, and this is really cool. I always thought if I wanted to add a bunch of geometry, I would throw it inside a subdivision surface, and then you lose your hard edges, so I knew you had to bevel or add extra geometry near the edges. But you don't have to do that in order to subdivide, okay? What you can do is while you have it selected, Control A to select all your polygons, hit U, Shift S. Now I can subdivide here, and I can choose the division of subdivisions, or if it's smooth. If I say smooth, it's going to do what it just did, right? If I say U, Shift S, and I uncheck smooth, watch this. When I saw that, it just blew my mind. Maybe I'm dumb, maybe you already know that, but that was like awesome. Like, okay, finally I can add geometry evenly without having to manually do it and without losing the shape that I've already created. It's really good with custom objects and a good way to do it along anything that you don't want to affect the shape of, you just want to add more geometry to. Quick tip number 10 is if you accidentally move your camera around, what your view is in the viewport. Say I accidentally misclicked and now I'm looking at a different angle and I want to go back to how I was just looking at it. Instead of hitting H, because I didn't want to hit H, I wanted to go back to where I had my camera because I was kind of framing up my work. So 2 ways you can do this. One is you can build a camera where you want it to be and make sure you select it. 2 is if you hit Control, I'm like, okay, so I just moved my camera and I don't like where it is and I want to go back, but I hit Control Z and it undoes my action but not my camera. So I'm like, crap, redo that. If you go to view under here, it's a Control Shift Z to undo your view. Control Shift Z, Control Shift Z, and that will get you back to where you wanted to be. So if you don't have a camera in your scene yet, but you were framing stuff up, and a good way to avoid that is to add a camera to your scene, put that where you want it, and then uncheck this box. So then you have perspective mode. If you want to look through your camera, you just choose it, but don't move around. It's easy to forget that this is ticked. Okay. But there you go. Control Shift Z to undo viewport moves. Another quick tip is to click in the middle mouse button. That will open up your other viewports here, and each of these viewports can be customized. This is really good for modeling and things. This is an easy, quick tip. Perspective view is the default top, front, and right. This is good. Everything you do inside of here happens in all these, and all the shortcuts you've learned, like H, 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 will frame everything up so you can see everything at exactly on screen, everything that's on screen at the same time. Okay, so there you go. And if you want to click into one, you just right click, middle mouse click, If you want to click into one, just middle mouse click into any of these and it'll go to that view. If you try to rotate inside this view, it'll only rotate oriented to what you just did, which is easy to do. And then you try to hit undo and unpivot what you just did. Just Control Shift Z, like we talked about. Get you right back where you need to go. Quick tip 12 was something I sometimes would struggle with. Say I'm working on something and I decide I need some more space to look at something, and I've grabbed something on accident and I accidentally throw it up here. And I'm like, oh God, what did I just do? And I'm like, okay, undo. Undo doesn't fix that either. Okay, so you can grab these little boxes here and like, okay, I want to I want to take it back. And you can't figure out how to get stuff back to where it was. And you're like, oh my gosh, what the heck did I just do? And you spend 15 minutes. If you go up to Window and go to Layouts, go up and go to Window, go to Customization. Inside of that, you have Layouts, okay? And so you can do a startup layout, and then you can do a standard layout. And if you have a good layout that you have custom, you can save a layout, and then you can save that as your startup layout. So every time you load in, that's the one that'll go. And if you like screw something up, you can say load layout and load that one in, or go to one of the ones you have over here. And you can also lock your layout so that nobody messes with it, or you don't accidentally click around, because sometimes, I don't know why you would do that, because sometimes you need to move things around. But so there you go. So if you accidentally throw something somewhere you're not supposed to and you can't figure out how to get it back, go to your layouts and reload it. No problem. Quick tip number 13 is based on floors, infinite floors. If you do this object here, that's good in Cinema 4D. That's a good infinite floor. But if you use something like Redshift, like a third-party renderer that does not support the floor, you can sometimes use something like a plane. But instead of using a plane, and I'll show you why. We'll use a plane real quick. Say plane, we'll say T, we'll spread it out, okay, and we'll say, okay, there we go. So then we'll go to Redshift, render view, and we're like, okay, you know, that's our horizon. You know, that's okay. That's an okay horizon, right? It's fine. It goes all the way around. But let's say I change my angle, and then all of a sudden my horizon looks kind of funky, and I keep having to scale up my square bigger and bigger and bigger, and I keep getting these weird points. Instead of using a plane, use a disk. Using a disk will actually enable you to be able to... Using a disk will allow you to be able to move your camera angle around and still have a nice clean horizon line. You can add a little, you can smooth that out a little bit. Add some segments. So now if we hit render on this, you'll see the difference here. It's just a nice, much cleaner horizon line than the cube. And no matter which way you look, your horizon is going to be nice and clean. If you want to do something that has an even floor, that you're going to have a border too, right? Tip number 14 is how to create a cyc wall easily. You're going to want to create a plane. We'll zoom in here, hit H, we'll have everything framed up. So we've got a plane, we've got 10 by 10, that's fine. We're going to hit C to make that editable. We're going to go choose the polygons. We're going to double click this back layer. We're going to hit E to go to our movement. And then we're going to hold Control and drag this up at almost a 45-degree angle. And then again, and we're going to try to keep it the same-ish distance as that, and then go up, 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 okay? Till it's as high as you want it to go. This looks a little short. Try to space them out. There we go. So now when we throw this inside of a subsurface divide, we have this nice, smooth angle here. And if you want to get back into it, you can turn this off. Sorry. And take your plane and try to get this angle just a little bit. There we go. Like that. So you can adjust it. Get your angle back. Now you've got a nice, smooth cyc. So you can see that that provides a nice infinite floor look and a nice studio cyc wall. Tip number 15 is to set up project settings, like your FPS, your frame rates. You're going to hit, while you're just over here in your perspective, you hit Control D. Control D is going to bring up your project settings, and this is where you can set the scale of your project, whether it's centimeters, inches, whatever. If you're doing something ArcViz, this is very important. You can scale your project, but most importantly, you can adjust your frames per second. I like to do everything in 24. 1, because it's filmic and it goes along with a lot of video stuff. 2, it saves you 6 frames to render every second. So if you cut it down to 24, it's still going to look good. It's going to be nice. That's what film is. It's 23997. So it's going to look just as nice, and it's going to save you 6 frames per second. So if each frame takes X number of time, that saves you X number of time times 6 for every single second of your animation. Good to know. This is also where you control dynamics and your gravity and things like that, and your key interpolation, your to-do list info, things like that about your project if you want. So there you go. Quick tip number 16. This is a easy one. If you have something selected and you hit R, E is move, R is rotate, T is scale. So if you have something selected R and you want to rotate it, instead of just clicking this axis and spinning it around and trying to line it up at 90 degrees, hold Shift, and that's going to let you rotate it at 5-degree increments, which is going to let you get things exactly 90 degrees and things like that a lot easier, okay? And you just shift, you click that after you click the axis. So you'll start clicking and you hit Shift at any point and it'll just start jumping from 5 degrees from where you initially rotating from. Okay. Quick tip number 17 is the Enable Axis tool. Now this works with editable objects. So if I take this cube and I want to edit to this cube and I want it to rotate from this corner and rotate it like it's rolling on a floor. But if I just hit R and rotate it, it's rotating from the center point where this axis is, but I want to move that. So I'm going to click this, and what that's going to do is it's going to let me actually move that axis. And that actually leads us into quick tip 18, which is snapping. It's very useful in this regard. It's this magnet down here. Shift S is the shortcut. If you hold it down, you see you have all these options. You can do 2D snapping, 3D snapping. You can do vertex, edges, polygons. Sometimes snapping is great. Sometimes snapping is really annoying. But it's really good for this thing. So I want to take this axis and I want to put it directly on the corner. So if I see I'm just holding it, and because I have snapping on, it's going to give me all these options to snap to. I can put it anywhere along this edge. I can put it in the corner, which is perfect. That's exactly where I want it. So you can tell it wasn't exactly where I thought it was. So it's always good to double check, but there we go. So now if I uncheck my enable axis and I rotate my cube, it will rotate from that point. And I'm holding shift to make sure it rotates by 5-degree increments. So there you go. Axis is really good for hinges and things and making things move around and rotate. It's going to be your biggest use for that one. Changing the axis will also change where it scales from. Quick tip number 19 is to copy things. Oh my gosh. Quick tip number 19 is to copy things instead of hitting Control C, Control V to copy it and then moving it over. Undo that. All you have to do is hold Control and drag, and that will make a copy. Hold Control and drag. Hold Control and drag. And there you go. That will make a copy of your object. One last quick tip that is very helpful and still kind of annoying to me is when you're using the pen tool, the spline pen tool, always use it in one of the orthographic views here, top, front, or right, because what happens is, say I want to make a square, I'm going to say click, 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 and that looks like a perfect square to me, okay? But then when I rotate around, holy F, I've made some sort of crazy, trippy optical illusion. That's not a square at all. Perfect square to a rhombus is actually what I made. So because I did that in perspective view, you have no way of knowing that you're doing it in the right area. So if I go square, 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 oops, and then that, which is pretty close. But let's look at that in the perspective view. You can see that it is indeed actually a square. So that's the last tip, is when you're doing the spline tool, do it in one of the orthographic views because it will be a crazy, weird optical illusion. Hopefully those tips were useful. Again, thank you so much. Just if you have any more tips and tricks to provide for people, list them in the comments below. I'd love to create just a good flow of helpful tips. And also just a reminder, a Skillshare class is now available and the link is still below. So it'd mean a lot if you like and subscribe and share this video and check out my Skillshare class. It'd mean a lot. Thank you guys so much. You guys have been awesome. See you next time.